अब मैं मंच पे आमंत्रित करती हूँ प्रोफेसर मिलिंद सुधाकर मराठे जी, चेयरमैन नेशनल बुक ट्रस्ट इंडिया। कृपया पधारें और अपने हृदय के उद्गारों को एक शॉल भेंट कर कर हमारे मुख्य वक्ता को। मुझे लगता है किसी कारणवश वो यहाँ मौजूद नहीं हैं। अगर आप सभी की अनुमति हो, सर हैं यहाँ पर, मैं आमंत्रित करना चाहूँगी प्रोफेसर मिलिंद सुधाकर मराठे जी, चेयरमैन नेशनल बुक ट्रस्ट इंडिया। कृपया मंच पे पधारें और आज के हमारे मुख्य वक्ता M.J. अकबर जी को भाव के उद्गारों को, क्योंकि अतिथि का स्वागत हमारी परंपरा है, हमारी संस्कृति है, इस मौके पर फेलिसिटेट करें। Thank you so much, sir. Now, मंच जो है वो अब तैयार है एक अगले बहुत ही फ्रूटफुल सेशन के लिए। आप सभी एक बहुत ही सुंदर श्रोतागण, क्योंकि जब हम मंच से जुड़ते हैं तो दरअसल मंच पे बैठे उस वक्ता के भाव को जीते हैं। और आइए इस जीवंत यात्रा की शुरुआत करें। वेदांत, नाउ इट्स ओवर टू यू।
Thank you, Amrita. I have with me M.J.Akbar, who is a man of both politics and letters, and who has come out with his recent book as well, which we will talk about. He is a prolific author. He has written several defining books that have really defined contemporary politics, history, and much more. But Mr. Akbar, because this session is called Pen, Press and Parliament, all three extremely contentious words, I would say, pen, press and parliament, would you say that whether it's the pen or the press or the parliament, would you say, to start off with, that all of these three are under threat, if that's not too much of an overstatement?
The first one has become irrelevant. Who uses a pen anymore?
But the pen as a metaphor.
Yes, I know. And it was once called more powerful than the sword.
Yes.
Those were the
Long
days.
back.
Those were the days.
Yes.
Right. Press. Well, actually, the press is also now irrelevant because the press has changed. And when the form changes, the content definitely changes along with the form. But what I think it is very important to understand, as I was mentioning, the difference between communication, which is now the current buzzword in which we define what goes on in terms of media, the fundamental difference between communication and journalism as we understood it is morality, ethics. Right? We had the right to be, irresponsible, like I suppose everyone else, but it was not considered ethical, and it was a very important part of our mental, what we brought to the public. And Parliament, of course, is one of the unique institutions. Parliament is the heart and soul of democracy. Government is an offshoot of Parliament. Government, in both in its constitutional role as well as in elected role. So, if you see democracy weakening, it is when Parliament begins to weaken that democracy begins to weaken. And this point is not really, I think, taken into account as it should be, to the extent that it should be. And therefore, governments come and go. That is inevitable in a democratic state. That is our fundamental right. The fundamental right of a democracy is actually to remove a government. And but Parliament never goes. Parliament cannot stop. And so the Rajya Sabha, for instance, its term is contiguous, some form of parliament, and that is the importance of the institution. I think these points may be better made to an audience of MPs.
Yes. But before I get into, I do want to discuss your book in depth. But before I get into that, would you say that the discourse in Parliament, and that's something this is something that is extremely topical as well, that the discourse in Parliament has deteriorated significantly, from your time as an MP perhaps to now, particularly in the past, say, 10, 15 years, I would say. The discourse in Parliament has become extremely vague, rhetorical, and sometimes even something that doesn't concern the critical mass of this country.
Well, it just occurred to me that to an extent, if you consider this deterioration, it may be mirroring what is happening in media. Media has also moved from a conversation, an educated conversation with the people, into a shouting match.
Yes.
And if occasionally Parliament reflects that, then maybe the Parliament is also reflecting an environment created by media. What is news? And I tell you, it's not very much different from what should be the bookends or the pillars of Parliament. News is IQ plus EQ, right? And EQ is emotional content, because we are dealing with human affairs. IQ plus EQ plus emotional content and ethical quotient, right? If you combine these two into EQ, you get that. Parliament also should be a combination of IQ plus EQ. It should have ethical content, ethical views. It should have emotional content, because more than media, journalists are not elected by the people. MPs are. And I tell you, if journalists had to be elected or rejected every 5 years of their career, I don't know how many would last.
Or in fact, many of them would have lasted. I would disagree with you, because I would say that if you're saying that what's happening in Parliament or what's happening in a democracy is a reflection of what's happening in the media, then many of them would have lasted the course.
I said the other way around.
Yes.
I said maybe Parliament is reflecting media.
Yes.
So, in any case, what I'm talking about really is the public environment. And once the public environment gets tuned to shouting as a legitimate phenomenon, rather than an occasional phenomenon, there will always be occasional spasms of hysteria. In life there will be, right? There will come a time when you laugh hysterically, there will come a time when you cry hysterically, but that cannot be 24 hours of the day. When that becomes the sustenance and the diet, then you're going to have severe stomach cramps.
So one important element of journalism, like you guys understood it, was also speaking truth to power. And one of your books talks about it, Mirror to Power, and you called it a fractured decade many years ago. Why is that?
Possibly because the decade was fractured. The first fractured decade I saw was actually the 1980s. And I think memory probably doesn't travel as far back with too many people. The 1980s were a decade that will actually very much shape. They were both the nadir as well as the basis of resurrection. Because what this nation went through, what we all went through in the secessionist movements and so on, when the fragility.
84 particularly.
No, before 84. I mean, I'm talking 81, 82. Right? It was all building up. Right? I did interviews with Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, and on the roof of his chat where he used to sit, and all around was AK-47s, and it was just part of
Completely fortified and
completely fortified. And so on, but we sort of did it as part of our effort to be, we didn't think of it particularly as heroism. Just so, but that was the nature, and then the 84, then the 80s, then Mrs. Gandhi's assassination, then my friend Rajiv's assassination. It was a period of huge trauma. But out of that trauma grew India's faith in itself. Out of that trauma grew the realization of our generation that if we didn't step up, and including the political class, by the way, never underestimate their role, because the economic reforms, the ability to challenge all that had gone wrong with our experiment with India, with our decisions with India, required courage. And then enabling change of national opinion, that look, the socialism we practiced had turned rancid and we had to move on, right? But it was like challenging the holy writ. But we did it, that generation did it, and from it emerged the first decade, which would, I think, the first decade of hope would be the 21st century. And then from there, what we moved on in the last 10 years, right? Whatever else you may have to say, one of the greatest achievements, I'm choosing my words with care. Believe me, I'm choosing my words with care, because I do not want to be accused of sycophancy. I really don't want to be, and please don't treat it as that. Whatever else, there is no government which is perfect. Forget it. But one of the greatest achievements of world history has been the elimination of poverty in India. It is an enormous achievement. The World Bank reports, which have come in 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago, shows that poverty has dipped to less than 2%, which has become now a statistically negligible. When I began my career in 1971 in Times of India, the first stories we did for the Illustrated Weekly became cover stories for on famine. 1967, 68, 69, when I was in college and then in school, I remember going to Ranchi, because I used to love writing, and the money helped, was in Ranchi. And at that time, I saw a train of nuns who came to feed people from a slop bucket. Yes. And who was she? It's Mother Teresa and her nuns, missionaries of charity. First time I saw them. And the other day there was an occasion to meet, and I mentioned that, sir, I really don't understand what you mean by third largest economy, fourth largest economy. Really, these are statistics which leave me cool, if not cold. But when I was there as a kid, in my mohalla, Telnipada, Jute Mill area, slum area, right, people used to eat rice with water, not because it was high cuisine, because they couldn't afford dal. That's why they ate rice with water. From there, today, for the first time in recorded history, no Indian mother goes to sleep worrying that her child has gone hungry. It is an astonishing achievement within one lifetime.
And in fact,
I want to stress, I don't want to be odious in my comparisons, but just to stress the fact, in the same period, the World Bank, same report, says that Pakistan poverty has increased to 27 or 30%. That's the difference between a functional state and a dysfunctional state. And I really must use this opportunity, please, and I must address at this point, why is Pakistan a dysfunctional state? Not because Pakistanis are any different from us. They are the same people. They are the same Punjabis on both sides. It's because Pakistan has abandoned its cultural heritage. You cannot live on the banks of the Indus and abandon the Indus Valley civilization, abandon Mohenjo-daro, abandon the shores on which the Upanishads came to us, abandon Gandhara, abandon Harappa. How can you do it? A nation is built on cultural geography, not on religion. They turned Islam into a basis of nationalism. A religion lives in a temple or a mosque. A religion doesn't live in cultural geography. A religion is above that. A religion is your personal relationship with God. Right? And by the way, if Islam was sufficient as a basis of nationalism, why would there be 22 Arab countries?
That's an interesting point you are making, Mr. Akbar, and perhaps critics would say that thinking about civilization and thinking about restoring a cultural past is perhaps this is not the right time to do it as far as India is concerned, because the same World Bank report that you're talking about, multiple critics have pointed out that there are, in fact, various discrepancies in terms of how we measure poverty, which is why we've arrived at that number. Be that as it may, be that as it may.
I'm sorry,
but
Vedant, it's very important.
yes,
I really must
yeah.
intervene. I have a very simple measure of poverty. Is your stomach full or not? That's all. I've seen stomachs which are not full. Very often, when I've made this point, and the question and answer, just to preempt you, in the question and answer session, people have got up and said, where is these 200,000 crores going to come from? Which it cost for the food program.
Yes.
And I said, oh, very intelligent question, very valid question. Everybody has to do arithmetic and sums, and I will definitely answer the question to anyone, who wants to ask it. But can you come 48 hours later without eating for 48 hours? If you still have that question, I'll ask it.
But perhaps, sir, just to be the devil's advocate, as it were, perhaps stomachs full are not enough anymore. And, and you have your own definition of poverty. Many have questioned the government changing the definition of poverty to arriving at that number, but be that as it may. The point you made about Pakistan, and coming from the fractured decade. Yes.
The reason why I mentioned that is not because of Dr. Manmohan Singh's time. There was a famous definition of poverty at rupees 32
Yes.
a day,
Yes.
which was challenged. It is because of the food program.
Yes.
That is what has eliminated. That every family gets food. That is effective management of hunger rather than passing on. That's why.
Okay. You mentioned Pakistan, and because we were talking about the fractured decade, as it were, India's democracy has remained resilient through whatever we've been through, whether it was the 80s and then of course the economic reforms, a million mutinies, rebellions. India's democracy has remained robust in that sense. And when we look at what's happening in Pakistan, in fact, you've written a very interesting essay, and there's this one line in your essay which I found very interesting, and I'll read that out. Imran Khan, because he's in the news, he's always in the news, but because he's in the news right now for the wrong reasons, Imran Khan has self-belief, you say, charisma and courage, but does not possess the equity of political class or a deep understanding of Pakistan's complex power system and the international forces that have helped to keep Pakistan intact. He began to believe that he could govern on his own terms, backed by popular support. Imran Khan is among the many popular leaders who've had the same fate, who've either been assassinated, who've had to live in long years of exile, and it's almost history repeating itself too many times over now, from Ziaul Haq to, of course, now Asim Munir. But, Mr. Akbar, how do you reconcile that with a democracy in the neighborhood that has remained robust and resilient through the years?
Yeah, it's the difference between a civilizational state and an artificial state. Why do I call it dysfunctional? Because no institution can be created. In my book, Tinderbox, Past and Future of Pakistan, past and future, no present. I described Pakistan as the jelly state. A jelly state is a state that will not melt, it's not butter. But it will never be stable. And because it has radicalism and an ideological roots are what they are, it will also be a toxic jelly state with nuclear power. Now, this is when I say lack of understanding. what is the problem? Actually, the title of the article you mentioned very kindly is more. My main point there, apart from this, was that actually Imran Khan is safer in prison than outside it. It's not Imran. Every single civilian who has threatened the military bureaucratic control of Pakistan since its inception has been assassinated or been eliminated or these days
Sidelined.
or eventually compromised and turned into a puppet like Shahbaz Sharif. It's Munir who runs the now. And not a single assassination has been investigated.
You made that
sorry.
point that we'll never know who killed Benazir.
Yeah, because it's officially investigated. Then the investigators are killed. As happened with Liaquat Ali Khan, first Prime Minister, 1950, long before. Rawalpindi, exactly, assassinated in public. Who killed? Nobody knows. Similarly, Zulfikar Bhutto, legally hanged, challenged the military control. My friend Benazir, traveling along with Sherry Rahman, who survived that assassination. The bombs killed maybe 170 people. Do you know what? For the first time in the history of Rawalpindi, or wherever she was, the streets were cleaned up immediately after her assassination, so that there were no traces left for investigators. Why? Because Pakistan has been taken over by a fanatic. If we want to understand the difference between our countries outside the realm of personalities, in terms of historical forces, then please remember one thing. Our freedom movement across the line may have begun from 1905, certainly was articulated and given structure and made into a national force by Gandhiji. And our freedom was driven by the urge to remove the British. The Pakistan movement was never driven by the urge to remove the British. It was a search for freedom from Hindus. And that is why, from the beginning, we had a foreign policy which was structured around the idea of strategic autonomy, which would protect the idea of independence. Independence and freedom are not the same thing. Many countries have got freedom from colonial rule. They are not independent. But we understood the difference, and that is why till today Prime Minister Modi will protect the independent strategic autonomy of India from the hostility of any White House. This, what Pakistan did immediately was, in order to protect itself from what Jinnah said, that in 1946 Cairo press conference, that the British or the coming Hindu menace, quote unquote, is much worse than anything the British have done. So that is the mentality. Now these forces never reflected the voice of the people. One of the great myths that we have is that democracy came under the British. Nonsense. As usual, the British are the masters of lies. Right? And they were the Bible of deception. In 1946 elections, only 9% of the people voted. The taxpayers, the ratepayers. So it was a vote among the rich and along separate electorates. It was a hoax. So along this, on the basis of this hoax, you create a state. Naturally, you will use that. But this in Pakistan, not in Pakistan, not one of these principles works, because the state was created for a particular people, a particular set of people, an elitist class.
And against a critical mass.
Yes. It is the only country in the world which doesn't have land reform. Nobody realizes that. I'm still waiting for that magic moment when we'll actually discuss my book.
I'll come to that. We've enough time, sir. But Mr. Akbar, just a follow-up on the point you made that till the time a state believes in these 5 principles or a state embodies these 5 principles, our democracy is all right, our democracy
Yes,
is
yeah.
intact. But is there then a difference between what the state believes, which is, which is there in our statutes, which is there in the constitution, and what a state practices?
There will always be a difference. Do you think in America there is no difference between what George Washington wrote and what is currently happening? Democracy is a flexible, human behavior.
But then what is a better parameter of judging how a
principles.
democracy is doing?
You see, the principles of the Constitution will always become the corrective from excess. That's the reality. And that is what saves us. Therefore, the inviolability of our Constitution is the fundamental. And therefore, the worship of the Constitution is fundamental to our democracy. That is why
it's a safety net.
we have so much respect for Baba Sahib. Because his hard work, the principles of the Constitution were laid in 1931 by the Mahatma Gandhi's resolution at the 1931 Karachi Congress, right, which was presided over by Sardar Patel. But the turning of that into law and into statutory was extraordinary achievement. And to do it within a year and a half or something, I don't know.
Yes.
Right. Therefore, he deserves every bit of recognition.
Right. I think the magic moment has finally arrived, sir. Your latest book, After Me, Chaos, Astrology in the Mughal Empire, an extremely fascinating read. And you seem to have a very interesting take on the Mughals. You have said it time and again, Mr. Akbar, that we are a product as a country of cultural synthesis. But when you look at the Mughals, you have a very interesting take. And again, like Imran Khan, the Mughals are always in the news. But you say that people like Akbar, people like Jahangir are more Indian than somebody like Aurangzeb. And you have said that, I'm paraphrasing what you have said multiple times. So talk to us about that. How do you see Mughals as an inevitability when it comes to the reading of our history? But at the same time, you also make a distinction between more Indian Mughals and more anti-Indian Mughals.
Actually, it's more synthesis movements rather than a synthetic movement, like Aurangzeb. Now, first, I don't say it. Every single page in the book is based on primary sources, not secondary sources. I have said nothing that has not been said in the authorized history of Akbar. In the authorized, not authorized, in the autobiography of Jahangir, a brilliant autobiography. Tuzak, in the Shah Jahan Nama, and so on. Every single thing there. So when Jahangir, for example, says, finally after, Mughals, their only battles were with their relatives. When finally, he defeats whatever and becomes his son, his son, and becomes emperor. The first book that he reads, he wanders into his father's library for the first time, now as emperor. The first book that he reads is Ramayana. Abul Fazl, in Akbar Nama, please, I hope you buy my book, but in case you don't want to, at least buy the Harvard edition of Akbar Nama. He attributes 4 texts of Sanskrit astronomy to divine origin. Brahma Siddhant, Surya Siddhant, Som Siddhant, Brihaspati Siddhant. Akbar gave the title of Jagat Guru to Hir Vijay, a Jain monk of the Tapagacha. They encourage synthesis in 100 ways. You know, one of the most fascinating ones, I tell you, is the way they created a new language. And when they knew they had to find Indian words, Hindi words for Persian words. So the burqa becomes Chitragupt. What a lovely translation. The kula, cap, becomes Sis Soba, that which honors your head. Ribbon, which is Muhe Baaf in Persian, becomes Keshgan. Shawl, Param Naram. Footwear, Payavzar, becomes Charandharan, and so on. Their faith, you know, after all, they've often been asked the two most questions which I keep getting asked because it's a book on astrology. And by the way, these are a very small glimpse of what you will find. Before, just on this subject, Akbar actually, they all believed in astrology because it came from the Mongol ancestry. Sahib-e-Kiran, Sahib-e-Kiran, Taimur's title Sahib-e-Kiran means Lord of the Two Conjunctions. That was Shah Jahan's title also. But Akbar converted it into an official title of the court, which is
In fact,
Jyoti.
that is a fascinating revelation in your book, that Akbar institutionalized astrology in a sense, and he created a post which was called Jyotik Rai, if I'm
Yes,
not
Jyotik
mistaken,
Rai,
a post that
absolutely.
was held by even Brahmins.
Not even Brahmins. For 120 years, it was only held by Brahmins from Banaras. Just in case you think the skepticism is now rising large on your horizon, I've got the names. Right?
Attribution is key, and because you make the claim that all of these are primary
Yeah.
sources.
Dear Akbar, Neelkant,
Hmm.
Jahangir, Chintamani, Kesava Sarma.
Hmm.
Jahangir's elder, Jahangir sort of Shah Shuja, who was Jahangir's elder son. Balabhadra from Bengal. Shah Jahan, Paramananda, Malajit, and so on and so forth. And they would not step out of home or go anywhere or go to war without checking about the right time with astrologers. Every coronation was done, and coronations were postponed until the auspicious time. Now, what did all this mean? This was a signal, along with the political alliances with the Rajputs, that they were not hostile to Indian culture. That was the first signal.
They embraced it.
India. And second, they embraced it and integrated it. And this was the pattern for 100 years. That is why that empire still resonates in public memory. It is not simply the abolition of jizya. You know, it is said very often that the vast melas and so on, there was a temple tax on temple entry. All of it was removed for the people, because they knew that, you know, in India the concept of legitimacy, we have a very interesting and important concept of legitimacy for any government. It is reflected in the word Prajatantra. Prajatantra, even royal kings, because the legitimacy as kings in the Western is the halo, which is the divine right of kings. But Prajatantra says that you have to have legitimacy through the acceptance of the people. And Prajatantra is not the same as Loktantra. Loktantra is democracy. Of the people, by the people, for the people. That was feudalism. But even feudalism required acceptance of the people. So these concepts are very inbuilt. And they found reflection in that. And I think there's fabulous stories of Akbar's birth. This story I will I think take a minute or two to tell. It's all there in Akbar. The first volume of Akbarnama, 80% is nothing except a study of horoscopes, which would delight every astrologer in Pune.
And bad omens.
And you know, in 1542, when Akbar was born, the Mughal Empire was finished. It would had only a become a 15-year phenomenon because Sher Shah had destroyed them, driven them out. Humayun was escaping death either from Sher Shah or from his brothers, in Kabul. And they did not have a single, they didn't have money. He went to Umarkot and was given sanctuary there as a mercenary soldiers because the Rana of Umarkot wanted them to go and fight the Nawab of Thatta. Anyway, so they came in there and story, and Humayun had to take all the men with him to the Thatta campaign. He left behind only one person, and that was Maulana Chand. Maulana. So astrology, by the way, was a part of the
It was secular.
Persian. No, it was multi-faith.
Yes.
Right. Secular is a very modern concept, which is anti-religion. So it is part of religious cosmology. And he left behind only Maulana Chand with instructions that you must get the right moment of birth so that no disputes over the horoscope that will be written. And Maulana Chand, he is sitting there in the evening, and suddenly he hears the rustle or murmur from the women's quarters that the labor pains have started. He goes hysterical. He goes berserk. And he says, no, the child cannot be born now. It is only 5 hours later that a moment will come that comes but once in 1,000 years. And only a boy born then will become a Chakravarti. So the women do what they do because they are far more realistic than astrologers. And they start laughing at the old man and say, get out of the way, let's do our work. Once the process of nature starts, we can't interfere with it. Get out of the way. Something strikes this man. There is a woman there, obviously one of the helpers, who is not very good looking, shall we say. And he catches her suddenly, and it's dark, by the scruff of her neck, rushes into the room where Hamida Banu is in labor, shoves her face onto Hamida Banu's face, and she gets so shocked and startled that the labor pains stop. And then the child is born at exactly the hour as desired. So, and tell you, I've often been asked, which is I suppose, I think inevitable, that you've written all this about astrology. Do you believe in astrology yourself? And I must tell you, I thought this answer out. I am not, trust me, this is an honest answer, not a fabricated answer. I am not so arrogant as to believe that all knowledge of the Brahmakand ends at the limits of my comprehension. How do I know?
In fact,
When I look at the stars, try looking at the stars. Who are we? How do you say there is? I don't know if there is a pattern or not. But who am I to deny it? In any case, astrology, Kublai Khan had 5,000 astrologers.
yes.
Catherine of Medici was an astrologer. The whole of Europe had astrology. Astrology would not have survived across continents if there wasn't some credible evidence of its authenticity in practical life.
In fact, there are many interesting revelations in your book. Just to follow up to the story that you told, I think it's an Akbarnama. You mentioned that even Jahangir saw a comet, a bullet-shaped comet, and then he saw it as a sort of a bad omen,
Very bad
and then Aurangzeb almost foretold his decline. And I think the sense that I got from your book is that it's not just power and politics; it's also planets. It's also astrology that sort of led to a lot of decisions being taken by the Mughals, and even the decline of the Mughals. And I saw what is that book called? I'm forgetting, where Aurangzeb almost foretells that his own
That's the Aurangzeb never permitted history to be written. But his correspondence is preserved and now translated by Sir Jadurnath Chaurkar.
Even Bahadur Shah Zafar in many of his accounts.
That's
talks
much
about-
later.
yeah,
Now
much
we are
later.
talking 1857, but I'm talking about now. Aurangzeb hid. Aurangzeb hid it because, as an Islamist, shall we say, he was worried. But even he, his own coronation, he was coronated. He did his coronation twice. Once after defeating Dara, and the other time after defeating Shuja. Postponed for weeks because of the right timing. He would not move out like any of his predecessors. Jahangir, he saw those comets before Aurangzeb's birth. And he says, I worry about the future. Because this child, and he's a baby, he's just born, is born under these stars. Now to Aurangzeb's story. He lived till 90. At the age of 80, I've got actually the specific date. He finally calls his eldest son. You know, like a good Mughal father, he had kept all his sons in prisons for various number of years. And he called his eldest son that, after I'm 80 years old, but I think you are the successor now of which I can think of. And he says that, now let me tell you things that I wouldn't discuss. Father-son. Right? Father-son dialogue in those days meant a monologue. Huh? The sons kept quiet. So he said that to me. He says, I was the third son. The fourth, Farad, was useless. He was a drunkard. But of the three, Dara was my father's favorite. Yes. He was the anointed heir. And if something had happened to Dara, which is normal, my brother Shah Shuja, who ruled Bengal very capably for 23 years, he would have been. Who was I? But I always knew from childhood that I would become the emperor. Why? Yes. Because the horoscope written at my birth, it's now 80 years. Every single thing in my life has come true as predicted in that horoscope. And then he says, now my dear son comes the bad news. Today this empire stretches from Badakhshan. Badakhshan today is in Tajikistan. From Badakhshan up to nearly to Kerala. And he says, it's the most stable thing. Who can challenge its might? And after I'm dead, within 2 or 3 years, everything will crumble. That is what the horoscope also says.
And what will happen after me? And then he
says, he uses the Farsi for it, Hamza something, and says, after me, chaos. And that's the title of the book.
Yeah. And
so the power of their belief in astrology and the evidence that they had in their own lifetimes means that there was some.
And he makes that point that even science needs spirituality to remain grounded. And you talk about it in your book as well, how Akbar even lamented how sort of Aurangzeb, in a sense, threatened India's cultural unity. But Mr. Akbar, the one interesting achievement of your book, I would say, is that perhaps this is the first book on Mughals that has really pleased the current dispensation. Because, well, you had the defense minister say that this is about Jyotish Shastra and India's ancient wisdom, etc. But my question to you, Mr. Akbar, is...
thank you for checking with the current dispensation. I haven't.
Okay. I'm sure you haven't, but they're quite pleased by it. Be that as it may, my question to you is that would you then say that an objective reading of the Mughals is important? And many a times we've seen in the past couple of years particularly how certain sections of Mughal history have been wiped out from history books, and you have a certain kind of reading of the Mughals that is encouraged. You recently had a disclaimer in one of the NCRT books also saying that this is not a reflection on any current community, etc. And the point is that a certain kind of interpretation and reading of the Mughals is encouraged that suits certain people and that suits those in power. Would you say that an objective reading of the Mughals, like in your book, which talks about Akbar as somebody who embraced India's culture and Aurangzeb as somebody who threatened India's cultural unity, would you say that objective reading of the Mughals is important and that must not be discouraged?
An objective reading of every single dynasty which ruled India, whether regionally, nationally, large swathes, and objectivity is critical to our understanding of ourselves. And disruptions, variations have taken place. The British did their best. So much destruction of history, so much artificial. Doesn't matter. India is older than the British. India is more powerful than distortion. The Ganga is interrupted by islands, is interrupted by rivulets, but eventually Ganga finds its way. Right? India has so much power to find its right course. It's amazing. I do not exaggerate when I say I feel blessed to be an Indian. I never, so many years of writing, quite often, I am almost always against some current or the other. By the way, if you're not writing against the current, nobody will even remember you. No point writing.
I think when you have two journalists in conversation, it can be endless. But I think we're running out of time. We'll quickly open it up for the audience. If you have any questions from members in the audience. Okay, I can't see. No, there is one. There are a couple there. Can we get the mic here, please? Here, please. Or maybe you can just shout out your question and I.
Location, ASI officer told me that this is a misbelief that Akbar was very secular. He didn't marry his daughters to anybody because he felt that he is the supreme. What is your means? I want the insight from you.
I apologize, but I get my history from primary sources, not from conversation. By the way, the truth is there in the historical texts, translated by Sir Jadunath Sarkar. Right? I commend very highly that you take some time out of your very valuable life to read. It's all there. And I know one of the first lessons of communication is that never hurts to repeat. Right? So please check with Uncle Google, check with Uncle Amazon. The book, if it interests you, since the question has been asked, please, After Me Chaos, Astrology in the Mughal Empire. Please read it. Please. Right? After that, because it will clarify so many doubts that have emerged out of surface.
Any other questions? There, yeah.
Good evening, sir. Just wanted to ask your opinion with your experience in parliament, press, as well as the pen, and your knowledge about the astrology. What do you see with your past previous experience of more than 5 decades? What is the next century would be like for us?
I wish I was an astrologer. I would have been more confident in my answer. But I tell you something, I think with great confidence. India is moving into its trajectory of achievement. It's true. It's true. You have to see Pune 50 years ago and see Pune today. What you will see is the traffic. What you will see is the bustle. What you will not recognize is the extraordinary economic power it represents. This is rebirth. Now, nobody from here wants to go to Bombay. Bombay wants to come here. So, this is change. India is changing at a pace which is unprecedented and changing for the better. Challenges, of course. Possibilities of falling into a pit and breaking your leg. Human.
Many.
Human. But the next generation, you will see, will leave the previous generations far behind.
I think that's a great note to end the session on. And perhaps the strongest message from this conversation is that the power of India is truly from we the people, and that remains constant. Thank you so much, Mr. Akbar. Thank you. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Very good. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Indeed, it was a great, great, great session. Thank you, Vedant. और विचारों के आदान प्रदान का जो ये सिलसिला है वो सुबह से निरंतर गतिमान है, बह रहा है और अपने अगले सत्र की ओर